In this video, we are going to introduce right triangle trigonometry. And we're going to be using sine, cosine, and tangent. Those are the buttons that we use, or those are the things that we use when we're talking about trigonometry, which are these buttons on your calculator. Sin, cos, and tan. Well, that's sine, cosine, and tangent. So all that this is just relationships between sides and angles. So sine is just a specific relationship between certain sides and of this triangle. So sine of an angle is always the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent side always divided by the hypotenuse. And tangent is always the opposite side divided by the adjacent. So we have a way to remember that is SohCahToa. And I like to kind of write it out this way. Kind of separates the capitals kind of separate my trig functions. So sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So sine of some angle. So here's our picture. So sine of some angle is going to equal the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So the opposite of that angle is down here. The hypotenuse is across from the 90. And then cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. Cosine of some angle is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. So the adjacent is the side next to it. So the adjacent is this one, and then over the hypotenuse. And then tangent is the opposite divided by the adjacent. Okay, so these are just going to be values. All right, so that is what SohCahToa represents. It creates fractions. It also creates proportions. It creates things like an equation, basically, that we can solve. All right, so before we do anything like that, first just kind of start off by setting up some fractions and making sure that we can create our fractions. So sine of an angle, cosine of an angle, and tangent of an angle. And so we're looking at angle A. Here's our picture. Angle A is here. So sine, let's do SohCahToa. So sine is going to be our opposite over hypotenuse. So from this angle, the opposite is 7. Hypotenuse is 2 feet 1 inch. Let's make that 24, 25 inches. And then the 2 feet, we'll make that 24 inches. So everything has the same unit of measurement. So sine of an angle is opposite over hypotenuse. So 7 over 25. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So 24 over 25. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we're not looking to do anything right now other than, are we comfortable? Oops. Opposite over adjacent. Are we comfortable setting up our fractions? All right. And then sine of B is now you're at a different angle. So now the opposite is here, but the hypotenuse is still the same. So sine of B is 24 over 25. Cosine of B is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And tangent of B is opposite over adjacent. So 24 over 7. So notice that different angles kind of have these different fractions set up for them. Okay, so that's one big part. Another big part of it is you're going to be using a calculator. And so want to make sure that we can use the calculator and make sure that we're in the right mode, making sure that we could get to what we need to get to. So if you're going to do sine of 27, first thing that you want to do is make sure on your mode that you are in degrees, because these two problems are actually going to be in radians. All right, and we'll talk about why that is. So if you're in degrees, we are good to go. So we're just doing sine of 27. And we're going to round that to, let's see, it doesn't say, so we'll round that to 2 decimal places. So 0.45. So sine of 27 equals 0.45. All right. Sine of 20 degrees, 30 minutes is, we got to make sure that we know where to find that on the calculator. And so we're going to do sine of 20, and then to find degree and minutes, you got to go into this angle right here. So apps, so second angle, we want the degree, and then we want 30 angle units. And then we can close our parentheses. All right, so 0.35. And then the next two are going to be in radians. The reason I can tell that they're in radians is that this is always a radian. Pi over something is always a radian kind of a measurement, but this one is a radian and not a degree because it doesn't have this symbol. It's not an error. It's not accidentally left off. It's not there because it's a radian value, which means that we need to change our mode to radians, and then we can quit out of there. And then now we'll do cosine of 1.34. Okay, so that gets us 0.23. So if we didn't convert that, so let's say we still had it in degrees, and we did cosine of 1.34, that 1.34 degrees is very different than a 1.34 in radians, and so you're getting a different value. Okay, so you just got to make sure that your mode is right. And then on this one, we want to make sure it's in radians. So we'll get out of there, and we'll do tangent of pi divided by 4. And that'll get us a 1. All right, and then the last piece of this is going backwards. So it's like having the decimal, but trying to figure out what the angle originally was. And that's what this looks like. All right, so this is sine of some angle is going to equal this. Well, the only way to find an angle measurement is to use an inverse feature, the little -1. So inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent. So to solve this, we're actually going to do inverse sine of that decimal, 0.6561. So that's exactly how we're going to type that in the calculator. So they want us to do, we're going to round to the nearest 10th. And we're going to be doing, find the angle in degrees given the parts, the nearest 10th. And looks like C we're going to do into the nearest radian. So A and B we're going to do in degrees, and then C will shift to radian. Okay, so first, before I do any of that, let's make sure the mode is right, which we're not. So let's jump over to degrees. And then we're going to do inverse sine of 0.6561. And that's going to give us our angle measurement. So 41 degrees. So our angle would have been 41 degrees. And then if we're doing this one, we're doing inverse cosine of 0.4226. And that would have been about 65 degrees. So the way we typed this in was inverse cosine of 0.4226, which gives us 65 degrees. All right, and then the last one, they want us to shift to radians and round to the nearest 1,000. For our 10th, we would have gotten a 0.0 on each of these. So really, I guess I should be having a 0.0 on here, 0.0. So let's fix that real quick. Just follow directions, 0.0 degrees, 0.0 degrees. 65.0 degrees. And then inverse tangent, but we do want it to be in radians, so we're just going to tweak our mode real quick to radians, and then we're going to do the inverse tangent of 2.825. 2.825. And so the way we typed this in was the inverse tangent of 2.825. And so our angle in radians is 1 point nearest thousandths, so tenths, hundredths, thousandths. The 5 bumps that up to 231. And that's it. All right, after this, then we'll start messing with solving for pieces of a triangle. But all these pieces of being able to do an inverse, being able to type in, set up your fractions, being able to type this stuff in, all those pieces are used. And so we got to make sure that you can know how to use those pieces so then we can do the real thing.